Well, thanks for coming after lunch. I know it's a hard time to be at a session indoors, but I'm super excited about today, and I've got my colleague Andrea De Leon speaking, as well as Megan Kang and Hugo Mata. And I actually wanted to start the irony. I flew down from Seattle last night, and I was at the airport, and I was at the airport bar, just waiting to board my flight. And this happens quite a bit if you're an Asian woman, so I see a number of you in the audience, so you'll totally identify, and actually I'm sure a number of you can identify with somebody speaking to me in Japanese and then me saying, no, I'm not Japanese, and him saying, but I always get it right. How did I get this wrong? I know everything about being Japanese as a white guy. So I thought it was really ironic, and it was a great opportunity to just really touch on what the foundation of cultural competency really is based on, which is to not make assumptions, right? And to ask the right questions, and to always acknowledge that we have something to learn from everyone that we meet, and especially different cultures, and that we bring our cultural value and practice and understanding into processing information, which is essentially what we're going to be talking about today. And we're going to hear 3 different approaches to using cultural competency in outreach efforts, in advertising and kind of print and electronic media, outreach approach that's founded in that uses Latino cultural approaches to direct or to communicate more effectively, and then a big multifamily project in Oakland that had a wide variety of audiences and types of people that they had to reach. And so I'll just quickly read bios, and we're going to do questions at the end, because all these presentations have so much to say to each other, and I think it'll give you guys an opportunity to really speak to the panelists directly and have them kind of bounce off each other. So first, we're going to hear from Megan Kang. She's a project specialist at SGA, which is an environmental marketing firm which specializes in community-based social marketing. She attended Berkeley, she was in Teach for America for a couple years in Detroit, and then ultimately worked at the U.S. Embassy for the State Department in Mexico City. Hugo has worked for C2 Alternative Services for more than 12 years, participating in outreach projects with Spanish-speaking audiences. He's the director for media and bilingual outreach, where he works closely with C2's team in developing environmental education programs for non-English speakers. And then lastly, my colleague Andrea, who provides waste reduction, technical assistance, and education around the California Bay Area. She brings a well-rounded environmental and social sustainability background and is trained in community-based social marketing as well. She graduated from SF State with a BA in Environmental Studies and a minor in Asian American Studies. Oh, we still have some seats over there. And there's a couple seats up front, too, if you guys want to come sit up front. I know everyone loves to sit in the front. Okay, so we're going to hear from Megan first, and then Hugo, and then Andrea. Thanks.
Good afternoon, everyone. Hi, thank you for coming. My name is Megan Kang, and I'm a project specialist at SGA, and I'm here to talk to you today about avoiding lost in translation. Now, as many of you know, it's all too often that we see companies and organizations trying to reach non-English speaking communities by just translating their message directly. And unfortunately, this can all too often lead to unintended and very unfortunate consequences. I'm going to start off with a few examples. This one reads, "If you are stolen, call the police at once." This is from a Shanghai subway station. I don't know exactly how you would do that. This is some shredded pork made for children. It says, "Child shredded meat, a delicious classic." And the thing is, this also happens the other way. American and English-speaking companies and large organizations also get it wrong quite often. Like Schweppes, the tonic water, which in Italian was translated to Schweppes toilet water. I don't know how that would taste. And then the American Dairy Association's famous Got Milk campaign, which was translated into Spanish into "Are you lactating?" It's a good one. And then, of course, KFC's famous finger licking good slogan, which in Chinese came out to "Eat your fingers off." So, as you can see, it's all too easy when we do direct translations to get it very wrong and create very unintended consequences. So today, I'm here to talk to you about how do you get it right. And more specifically, how do we create culturally impactful outreach in environmental settings? So how do we design and execute our environmental campaigns to get the behavior change that we want while being sensitive to different cultures? And I'm going to be talking today about 2 projects that SGA worked on with Paint Care to try to reach out specifically to Chinese-speaking communities and Spanish-speaking communities. And we learned 4 very important components that can help you create these types of culturally impactful outreach campaigns. And those are the 4 steps I'm going to share with you today. The first step, listen, listen, listen. Like Stephanie said, any assumptions that we hold, try your best to put aside. And when we are trying to reach out to different ethnic communities, it's really important that we understand what are their fundamental beliefs, what are their cultural norms, and how can we listen to them in their language so we can pick up on the words that they use and the idioms that they use. Next is, how can we sketch out their framework? And when I say framework, and we're going to go into this a little bit more in detail, but what are the barriers to a certain action, and what are the motivators to a certain action from our target audience? And then how can we create a message that fits into their framework? Third is finding the right messenger. Now, we live in a world where we're always getting thrown messages, what to do, what to buy, who to vote for. There are messages constantly being thrown at us. The key is not just finding the right message that fits into their framework, but finding the right person who our target community trusts to deliver this message. And then fourth, how can we make it their story? How can we personalize this message and put our target audience at the center of the message to make it compelling and to make it resonate with their lives? So I'm going to go into 2 case studies, which were 2 projects that we worked on alongside with Paint Care. And the first is with Chinese-speaking communities in California. And again, where we begin always is deep listening. So actually, before we even get to the listening, I'm going to talk a little bit about what Paint Care was doing before we started working with them. So Paint Care was having some trouble reaching out to the Chinese-speaking community, which was a large portion of a community in California that did deal with paint and were DIYers, essentially. Now, they used the same approach that they used with the general audience, which was to tell them that paint recycling was actually very convenient and cheap. They thought inconvenience was the primary barrier, and that there were environmental benefits. So what Paint Care had done was translated some of their brochures from English into Chinese. And again, these brochures say, paint recycling is easy, it's cheap, and it's very accessible for everyone. However, these brochures weren't really connecting with the target audience, which is when we came in and were tasked to understand what was the right message and who was the messenger that could deliver a revised and refined message. So we started by listening. We went down to LA, we went to San Francisco, and tried to interview, through surveys, Chinese speakers. And the important thing was we interviewed them in Mandarin and Cantonese. So we really picked up on what are the languages and the words that they're using, and how do they understand this notion of paint recycling. What was interesting was we actually found that inconvenience, which was the barrier for most general audiences, was not the barrier for Chinese communities. We also found that environmental benefits were not very compelling for this particular community. Step 2 is to sketch out the framework. Now, the framework that we abide by at SGA is called community-based social marketing. And the 2 primary things when we're doing our research, before we even begin to outreach, is really understand what are the barriers to a certain action. In this case, it's recycling paint. And what are the motivators to get people to do that certain action. So again, our general audience, the primary barrier for paint recycling is inconvenience, which is why Paint Care has made a large effort in making paint recycling more accessible and convenient, and free, of course. The primary motivator is environmental concerns. People want to identify themselves as someone who's progressive, green, and recycles. This is our general audience. Our Chinese-speaking audience was very different. The primary barrier that we noticed was actually lack of awareness. From our surveys, we noted that 90% of Chinese speakers that we interviewed didn't even know that paint was recyclable. And interestingly, once they knew that paint was recyclable, 72% said that they would be willing to recycle paint. And it wasn't because of environmental concerns. There was this one word that kept coming up in all of our surveys, in our interviews, and it's a little bit of an interesting word because it doesn't have a direct translation into English. There's not a single word that encapsulates it. But the word in Mandarin is fu zeren, which actually means responsibility, liability, duty, blame, trust, kind of all of those things, but it's to bear your duty and your responsibility. It's almost like an old Confucius idea, but to bear your moral responsibility is your duty in life, and to not do that is almost shameful. So from our surveys and from our interviews and speaking to the Chinese community in Mandarin and Cantonese, we found out that our approach, our outreach approach, would follow the same work. First, we would address the lack of awareness by teaching them that paint is recyclable. And then next, we would use this sense of fu zeren, or appeal to their duty or their ethical responsibility towards the community, do the right thing in order to increase paint recycling. And this was really the crux of our approach. Step 3, using the right messenger. So as I said, it's not enough to just have the right message that's going to appeal. It's also important to find out what are the proper mediums to actually access our community and who is the right person to deliver this message. So from our research, we found out that unlike our local news, which is highly sensationalist and oftentimes entertaining, Chinese local media was actually profoundly influential within Chinese-speaking and immigrant communities in California. And the reason is that Chinese media outlets were kind of like a bridge to the homeland and to local immigrant communities within California. And so oftentimes, Chinese speakers would actually learn some of their social cues and social norms from watching local media. Another thing that we know from community-based social marketing is that a message is much more powerful when it comes from your peers, as opposed to a message coming from government or coming from Paint Care or other organizations. When it's coming from someone that's in your community, you're bound to listen to it a little bit more. So we identified community champions, which is what we call community peers who are doing the right action, to advocate on local Chinese media channels how easy it was to recycle paint, how convenient it was, and how it was the right thing to do. So these are two of our community champions, Cindy and Donna, who talked about recycling. My colleague, Philip Cow, who is the one responsible for this project, also went on and talked about some of our survey findings. So as a result of our efforts, there has been a definitive increase in recycling for paint within the Chinese American community in California. And our efforts were highlighted on a few different statewide channels, including NPR. And we're excited to say that we did an effort that was not just an immediate translation, not a quick and easy translation, but we went in there and really listened. We understood what was going on in the Chinese community, what their perceptions were, and created an outreach plan that directly addressed those things. Okay, the second case study that I'm going to briefly talk about today is our efforts with Spanish-speaking communities in Southern California. So, actually, before I get there, so like our Chinese-speaking project, the first step is deep listening. And so two of my colleagues, Carolina Gonzalez and Jackie Ayala, held focus groups in Spanish to really understand what was at the crux, what were the barriers and the motivators for Spanish speakers in Southern California. So we'll revisit our general audience, barriers, inconvenience, motivator, environmental concerns. So interestingly, for the Latino audience, the barrier was a little bit more nuanced. It kind of came down to rules, cost, and awareness, but some of the questions and some of the apprehension boiled down to, do I need to have a receipt in order to recycle my paint? Or can I recycle my paint at a store in a city that I don't necessarily live in? Or do I need to have my ID on me when I recycle? All of these rules, these kind of procedures were the major barriers for the Spanish-speaking community in Southern California that we found. The primary motivator was protecting your family and your children and adhering to community norms. So what was really interesting was that rather than these more abstract environmental norms, the Spanish-speaking community that we listened to cared much more about their family and being a protector and keeping them safe and healthy. So equipped with that knowledge, we went ahead and developed 2 videos that addressed those barriers and those norms. So I'm going to show you one of those videos. And we created them in Spanish and English. I'm going to show you the English version for this sake.
Conoce a Leo. Recientemente se mudó a una nueva casa con su hija Sofía. Hoy es el cumpleaños de Sofía. Él quiere hacer algo especial para ella, así que se pone a pensar en qué podría hacer. Podría comprarle un nuevo muñeco de peluche, pero ve a su alrededor y se da cuenta de que ella ya tiene demasiados. Podría comprarle globos, pero recuerda lo triste que ella se pone cuando se explotan. Así que Leo decide que los dos podrían pintar juntos el cuarto de Sofía. Él quiere que la habitación sea tan mágica como lo es ella. Así que ambos toman sus pinceles mágicos y llenan de vida la habitación. Después de pintar las paredes, les queda un poco de pintura de sobra. Leo recoge la pintura no utilizada y la lleva al garaje. En el garaje, Leo coloca las latas de pintura en el estante junto a otras latas de pintura que tenía de proyectos anteriores. Ella mira la torre de latas de pintura en el garaje y piensa en el espacio extra que tendría para jugar. Ella aprendió sobre el proceso de reciclar pintura en la escuela y recuerda que la pintura puede ser utilizada para hacer pintura nueva, usarse como combustible o para hacer otros productos y piensa: sería genial regalar la pintura por el bien de mi comunidad. Así que le pregunta a su papá: ¿por qué no la reciclas? Leo mira a su hija y se da cuenta de lo emocionada que está. Y piensa: es verdad, probablemente no voy a reusar la pintura. Además, se da cuenta de lo maravilloso que sería tener un hogar más limpio para ella. Así que decide reciclar la pintura no utilizada. Ambos se aseguran de que todas las latas de pintura tengan tapas y sus etiquetas originales. Las colocan en el auto y las llevan para ser recicladas a su tienda de pintura más cercana, la cual es aliada de la organización Paint Care. Ahora Leo y Sofía utilizan su tienda de pintura local afiliada a Paint Care para reciclar de forma gratuita toda la pintura no utilizada. Para encontrar tu locación más cercana, visita la página de Paint Care a través de reciclarpinturaesbueno.org. Llena de magia tu hogar y recicla tu pintura de sobra. Mantén feliz a tu familia.
Okay, I'm sorry, I lied. That was in Spanish, so hopefully it gave you guys an opportunity to practice your Spanish skills. But the point of showing that video is to demonstrate that there is a narrative to it, right? We're following a dad who keeps paint, and he wants to paint his daughter Sophia's room. And he just, keeps his old paint cans in his garage. And Sophia says, "Dad, why aren't you recycling your paint cans? I learned in school that paint is actually recyclable. And also, I want to play in the garage, so can you move those out of here?" Which is something that's probably relatable to some dads. And as you can see, we found the messenger to be the daughter. And in immigrant communities, oftentimes it's generation 1.5 or generation 2, that's the cultural bridge. And so we played off of this kind of personalized narrative that hopefully appeals and relates to a lot of our target audience. And we also did create a second video, which was based on what were the barriers. So as I mentioned before, some of the barriers that were brought up were the need for a receipt and needing to demonstrate some kind of proof of purchase in a particular store, which you don't need to have, or needing to live in the same city that the store that you're dropping off your paint was located in, which you also don't need to do, or bringing some form of ID. These were all barriers that you don't need, so we specifically addressed those in our video. All right, so in conclusion, culturally impactful outreach requires 4 steps. One is listening. That's shedding aside your assumptions, going in, asking questions, understanding from their point of view as well as their language what are the barriers and the motivators to a certain action. And so once you sketch out this framework and find that message that resonates with those barriers and motivators, you want to find the right messenger to deliver the message, someone that they trust and someone that understands them and they can relate to on a personal level. And then finally, we want to make it their story. We want to place them actually in the center of the story to make it personal, make it real for them. Now, all of these 4 things, of course, there's no way to guarantee behavior change, but by following these 4 steps and including them in your outreach approach, you can ensure that you will avoid getting lost in translation and that you will, in some way, make a more authentic impact on your target audience. Thank you so much.
How's everyone doing? Are you still with the lunch idea that you need to take a break and sleep and stuff like that. Well, get up. Here it is. Well, my name is Hugo Mata. I work with C2 Alternative Services. I do bilingual outreach. Our team is pretty small, but we outreach many counties with different programs. Outreach to the Latino community. I concur with what you were saying about the different barriers, but I will add a few more that I have encountered in the community. But having an identification, et cetera, to go to these places to dispose of toxics, et cetera, in general, is a big issue because many of them, they have this idea that it's a government agency. So they're still afraid. So having those documentations is very important for them. I just want to make sure that I'm not breaking the laws to bring all of that stuff. So just keep that in mind. So we've been doing our work, in particular myself. My background is in media, has nothing to do with recycling. But then I get into recycling and it's like, well, I can use my background to promote all of the different programs because media is a big, big thing with the Latino community. So when I started looking at all of the different materials, I noticed that there's a lot of translated articles, a lot of translated flyers, a lot of translations. But then I read the translations and it's like, what is this? I can barely read it myself, and I went to school, right? So some of the translations that I've been noticing in many of those different cities is not just a translation that is literal, but a Google translation. How many of you have done it? Are you guilty of some of that? Everybody is one of those things. Has it gotten better? Yes, but there's a lot that we need to do. So just think about that. There's more than just translating a translation of anything that you want to do. So before you do any of that, you need to acknowledge the demographics that you want to outreach. First of all, the Latino community is increasing and continues to increase. It is estimated that by the year 2050, it's going to be the largest minority group. It already is in some of the counties. I was just reading an article 2 or 3 weeks ago about Sonoma County, where right now it's about 29% of the community living in Sonoma County. So many of your counties have a big presence of Latino audience. So it's really important to keep that in mind. However, how many of you think that most of the Latinos that live in your area are all Mexican? Come on. Yeah, because we live in the West Coast, right? So everybody's Mexican. So that's one of the assumptions. Now, California is the highest concentration of Latinos, yes. But again, not everybody is Mexican. Just keep that in mind. And no, we do not speak Mexican either. Just the other thing. Sometimes we do on purpose just to see people's reaction. But we do not. By the way, I'm Mexican. Can you believe it? That's another thing that I usually get when people hear me speaking Spanish. It's like, wow, you speak really good Spanish. Well, I hope. I was born and raised in Mexico. And then the comeback is like, but you don't look any Mexican at all. You look very European. Like, that's actually going to make me feel better, which is kind of weird, right? Those are the assumptions we need to avoid. So Latinos do not recycle because they do not care about the environment. We were just talking about it. Yes, they do. They've been doing it directly or indirectly. I divide the Latino community in 3 different groups. Those that were born and raised in a small town, so they do recycling conservation out of need. They have to walk 3 or 4 miles just to get the water. So whatever water they get, they use it. If there is a family of 12, a pair of pants that the older brother wore 10 years ago, he's going to make his way down to the boy who's 3 years old. Like in my case, I ended up actually wearing the pants of my brother who was 12 years older than me years later. So they're doing recycling. It's part of what they do. Then we have those people that live in a small town. They might have a small infrastructure where you have el basurero, the truck that picks up the garbage. And it's not the infrastructure we have here. They actually ring a bell. Hey, I'm coming. So people come out with the garbage, and then you just tip them. You give them some money. So what they do, they actually put it in the truck and they divide everything by hand. They actually take the plastics out and then the garbage out, etc. Then you finally go to a big city like Mexico City where they have a small infrastructure and they have more knowledge. They have access to communication. They have access to media, etc. So their knowledge about recycling conservation is different. Think about those 3 groups when they migrate to a country like the United States, Australia, China, anywhere. So their experience is different and we need to keep that in mind. So a literal translation, obviously, is not going to work. Is it a good translation? Maybe, because you guys did a specific translating job on it. Yeah, but if you just do a literal translation, most of the Spanish comes from Spain. We do not speak Spanish accents in Mexico, Central America, South America. It's way different. We like to be different. All Latinos are Mexican, therefore all Latinos have same experiences, right? Do we? There you go. I did a similar presentation in Florida, and I went over there, and I told them, so everybody who's Latino here, is everybody Cuban? Is everybody Puerto Rican? And for the most part, everybody said, well, the people that I know are Cuban, the people that I know are Puerto Ricans, but their experiences are different. They're way different. I cannot say that I know very well the culture in the Cuban community because they speak like me, they speak the same language, but they have different cultural backgrounds. So I cannot talk for them, but I will need to go over there, submerge myself into it, and then I will tell you what's going on. Local media is a really important message. The message that you were showing up, I'm sure is going to be broadcasted in different cities throughout the United States, which is good, but you have to concentrate on local media. Find out what the radio stations are, the different newspapers, etc., so you can have a local message for local media. Mini dramas is a big one. My background is specifically in radio, where we used to do mini dramas, write stories like the one you presented on radio. We Latinos are very dramatic, aren't we now? We like the telenovelas and we like the drama in it. So with that, somebody crying and saying, if you don't do this, you're gonna go to hell. It creates this impact, and that's what you want. Believe it or not, we like that drama, and that's part of it. So mini dramas is a big thing with the Latino community in radio. You see it in soap operas. Every once in a while, they will put the message of recycling, of this and that, etc. Interviews is a big one. You are the experts, so do not be afraid to go to your local radio stations. They have spaces. With the Latino radio stations, Spanish radio stations, they have weekly programs that are free. They're there. They actually open their doors for you to be there. But it's important that you speak the language. It's really important. Many times they don't have a translator. So participate in those. Outreach materials is really important. You need to focus on that. So think about demographics again when you do that. Use familiar words, which is really important. Do not use textbook Spanish, because otherwise you basically you were trying to actually convey this message, but people are going to get more confused. So like the ones that you showed at the beginning, those are really, really good examples. That happens all the time at airports in Mexico. It happens all the time in different Starbucks. Who goes to Starbucks here? Sometimes they have a sign where it says the exit line, and sometimes they put excítese. Do you know what excítese means? To get really excited. So exit, when they translate it, is excítese. It's like, well, you don't want people to do that at Starbucks, I don't think so. But if you want, okay. Include illustrations. This is a big one. Again, create the drama. Put 1 or 2 lines, but then you have these pictures that make people attracted to it. Try to accommodate all literacy levels. That is also important. Again, you have 3 different kinds of groups of people that come from different places. A small word can actually change the entire meaning of a sentence. And you just saw that. It's really, really important. Or any document. I do a lot of translations myself, and they send me these flyers, and they tell me, just change a few things in the flyer. And I tell them, well, this is what the flyer says. You need to change the whole thing. Otherwise, you just put in a small patch in something that needs a lot of work. Cultural approach is the other one. If I'm going to be doing outreach, obviously, I need to be a bicultural person, a bilingual person, so that I can identify myself with the message. They need to be personalized messages, specifically for that area. Approach the audience. This is really important. I was working at the Sonoma County Fair this past weekend. There's hundreds of different booths in there, but they're sitting right there where you are. So if people approach, they just walk by and nothing happens. Some of them are actually on the phone, etc. So you need to approach the person that is approaching you and relate to their experience, which is really important. Why? I can just ask a person, so did you know anything about recycling? Sometimes they will say, well, yeah, I recycle. So that kind of opens up the door. So like, what would you recycle? And then they will tell me what they did. And then I find out that they're from another state. I find out that they're from a small town. And then I can start relating to their experience. So what do you used to do with la abuelita when she made some tamales or whatever? And what will you do with the husks? What will you do with all of these different things? Then they will actually become familiar with me and forget that I am a booth somehow being paid by the government agency, right? But that's basically the thing that they have. They're like, I'm not going to approach them because they want to find out everything about me. And we do. That's the other thing. If you're going to be doing surveys, just make sure that you don't have a cliff here and writing notes as they're talking. Just remember everything that they're saying, and as soon as they leave, then write that down, those notes. Really, really important. Be innovative. We always try to look for different opportunities for us to promote the recycling messages, oil, etc. Here in Sacramento, I was at one of those events, and then all of a sudden I was talking to this person who happened to be the outreach person for the Mexican consulate. Who would have thought? So this idea of actually going to the Mexican consulate, have a booth, whenever you want to be there, and promote use more oil recycling. And we have this tremendous support from the county of Sacramento. There's Kelly, people over there that she can testify to that it's been a really successful program. We are outreaching a specific group. In this case, it's the Mexican community that migrates to Sacramento, which is huge, which is really, really huge. So we have that opportunity to be there 365 days a year if you want to. You outreach people that are sitting like you waiting for their documents. We're doing presentations for groups of 100 people. Those people leave, then you have another 100 people, 30 people, etc. And each one of just in San Francisco, there's about 20 different Mexican consulates that you can actually visit. So I don't know what counties you're from, but it will be really good to explore that option. And then you have to have fun, though. You don't know how many times I've seen people that are doing this work, and they're so miserable. You could totally tell. It's like, so how's everything going with recycling? Same old crap, nothing's changing, all these politics, etc. And that actually gets reflected in the message you're actually telling people. Just imagine translating that into Spanish, using a translation, It will really, really, really bad. So the next is use the local media. These are just some radio stations that we have in Sonoma County that I actually go over there every once in a while to do an interview, to talk about different issues with water, conservation, recycling, climate change, etc. And as a matter of fact, as of last year, I started producing a radio show completely in Spanish called Nuestra Tierra in a local radio station called KBBF. And since we started the program, the radio station covers about 7 counties, including San Francisco, Marin, Sonoma, Napa. We will have like a couple of calls, etc. Now people call in all the time. It's like, I don't know where to recycle this. And on the air, we will answer that question. So we started inviting different agencies to come on to the show. It's like, we were going to be talking today about matrix collection, what's going on with those particular programs, etc. They come in. Right now, it's only in those counties, but I'm planning to have that show nationwide, so I need help. But it's going to get there. It's completely in Spanish, so the aim here is to actually do the same program in English in maybe a couple of years. So it's going to be Nuestra Tierra, Our Earth, in a couple of years. So if you happen to be one of those counties and you're interested in participating, hey, just get the money out. We will get it. Newspapers is another one. We started creating different articles that we write. Many newspapers want to have those articles. Sometimes they don't have enough material to fill those pages. So talk to them. And if you can actually sponsor some of the stuff they do, you will get a lot of really good stuff for your money. And I'm just talking about Spanish media, though. English media is a little bit weird. They want you to spend a lot of money. How do I know this? Believe me, I've been working with them for a while. So. But if you want to spend the money, if you have it, hey, go ahead and do it. Local magazines. Magazines is a big, remember I was telling you about the drama, how dramatic we are, etc. A lot of magazines, if they have like quinceañera pictures and wedding pictures and what she wore to these Academy Awards or whatever, that works. But if you can put an article right in between those pages, that works as well. Like Univision, Telemundo, those are the biggest television stations that we have. And if you put a commercial, a spot or whatever, nationwide, it's not going to have the same impact because each community is different. So you want to localize it. In Sonoma County, there's Univision 28. Here in Sacramento, is Univision 33, I believe. Telemundo 29 or 19, if you remember correctly. Talk to them, believe me. I work with them all the time in different counties, and they are open to listen to whatever you have to say, and you will get a lot of really cool stuff for the community. Social media is, I have to admit it, I do not have a Facebook page. You guys have one? And why do I do not have one? I just never had the courage to open one. But I'm going to look into it. And the studies show that the Latino community always has a phone. It's something that we need to explore. I haven't. I have to admit it. I'm new. I'm a virgin with social media. I know what you guys are thinking. You guys are perverting. And I was just talking about Nuestra Tierra. Nuestra Tierra, what it actually does, it's not just a radio show. What we started doing with it is that we created a program started in Sonoma County where we have the message of recycling only for Sonoma County Waste Management Agency. But right there, somebody will come in and ask me, so how do I conserve water? well, the water agency is not paying me. Should I give him the message or not? What do I do? So we started communicating with the other agencies. We have this really cool program, and people ask us questions about recycling, conservation, pollution prevention. Would you like us to promote this at the booth, and we can promote all these different services? So in here, we're working with 3 different agencies, one related to compost, the other one for water, the other one for recycling. So Nuestra Tierra started as a hub of information to promote it, a specific area with different agencies, and then it's just exploded. The interest of different media, and the radio station was one of them. It's like, we would like you guys to do what you're doing here, but put it on the radio, and you cannot reach thousands of people. Participating in community events is one big thing for the community. Try to go to PTA meetings, churches. Try to do any other opportunities that you can do, because I don't think that any event is small enough for you to actually waste the opportunity to go there. If you talk to 3 people, believe me, those people will pass the information to 3 or 4 more people. Broadcast interviews is really interesting. When it comes to translations, make them cultural. It's really, really important. And I know I'm almost out of time, so I want to run all of these really quick. So community events in local organizations, we need to do direct outreach, community organizations. I was just talking about churches, nonprofits, Mexican counseling, which is really important. And if you want to reach a multicultural audience, in this case, we have a program called the Family Car to promote specifically used motor oil and filter collection, which is now being taught by many adult TSL schools throughout about 20 counties. So you have the lesson completely in English. It's focusing on recycling used motor oil. We adapt it to every community. So the teachers use the lesson to promote recycling. The students learn English as a second language, and they also learn the message. So right now, I think that many of you are actually sponsoring some of that lesson, right? Raise your hands if you are familiar with the Family Car. So there you go. Some of you are familiar. If you guys want to talk to me about it, I'll be here, or you could also talk to some of them. Health providers is a big one. There's a lot of community clinics in the area, at least Sonoma. Anywhere that you could go, it's really important. Workshops is another one. If you just have a presentation of 3 or 4 seconds, doesn't necessarily cover the whole thing. But if you create a workshop on recycling, conservation, the importance, etc., in their language, believe me, they will listen, because they know that they're being counted. When you're ready to do the outreach, remember that I was telling you, do not assume. The only thing that you have to assume is that people are not familiar with recycling, conservation, etc. Those are the only things that you need to assume. These people don't know what I'm going to be talking about. They could be teachers, they could be scientists, etc. But just assume they don't know anything. And then you will tell them. But do not assume anything about their background, because that's not going to take you anywhere. Highlight the benefits of waste reduction. You mentioned some of those. Explain how and what to recycle. Really, really important. Make connections. Again, make cultural connections to where they come from, how they got here, what they're afraid of, etc., and then they will make a change. They reuse materials, etc. In Mexico, I grew up in a small farm where if somebody had a soda can, instead of actually throwing it away, we will use that soda can to plant a tree. Just have it in there, and that tree is actually later on going to be planted on the back of my house. If somebody had a bucket and that bucket had a small hole, that bucket is actually going to be used as a piñata later on. We will create a piñata because they don't have, obviously, the materials to do it, so we will create it. If anybody has a pair of pants that do not fit, etc., on those small villages, do not fit a specific person, they always talk to the vecinos or the neighbors, etc. I have a pair of pants. What can you do with this? Later on, you will see somebody with a very nice bag made out of blue jeans because somebody just created it over there. So just kind of think about that and how they're reusing a lot of those materials. Consumption habits, marketing agencies are doing all these studies because they know that there's a huge power with the Latino community. They're spending a lot of money on different things, so they will tell you more about that. So that is a presentation, but one thing that I always like to leave the presentation with is do not forget to have fun. It's really, really important, though, because if you hate it, you're in the wrong person, you're in the wrong business. So there you go. Thanks.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Andrea De Leon, and I'm with Cascadia Consulting Group. And Hugo, you're right. it's important to have fun. And so hopefully I'm going to close this up and, right after lunch, pump you guys up and get you guys excited about, all right, I learned all these great things. What does this look like when I'm out in the field? And that's exactly what we came across at Cascadia Consulting Group. We're a sustainability group that has an office in Oakland, but we're doing work across all over. And so I'll be talking a little bit about our role in a larger campaign called Oakland Recycles, where we were one of many other stakeholders that were involved in this campaign. But I'll be sharing with you our experience working with residents in multifamily properties around recycling and composting outreach, and some of the lessons learned that we came about from doing this campaign. All right, so a little bit of background. So last year, July 1st, Oakland was making a lot of different changes, specifically around multifamily properties. When I say multifamily properties, we consider this any apartment or condo that had more than 5 units. And before then, composting was voluntary to participate in, but now is becoming mandatory. And so there's this huge rollout of all these green cards. And so just like the other presenters mentioned, it's not enough to just give somebody a brochure and say, hey, all right, enjoy your green card, go do it. We realized we needed more than that, and we needed that kind of personal touch. And so Cascadia was part of, like I mentioned earlier, other stakeholders, including NCRA, who also received a grant to do some outreach in Oakland. And we worked together in collaboration to do some door-to-door outreach, because we realized that there's a lot of ground to cover, and Oakland's a big city, so getting a lot of folks involved was going to help make the outreach a lot more effective. And so I also want to mention that, and also that this program was also managed by the city of Oakland, but also involved the haulers and all the other stakeholders, which I'll talk about in a minute. But Oakland itself, a great city, home of the Warriors, hopefully win next season. But it's also a city that has a lot of great residents that make up all different types of demographics. And so the other presenters spoke on understanding your community that you're serving. And so we did that. We recognized that in Oakland alone, there's over 125 languages that are spoken, and more than 40% of those residents spoke another language besides of English if they were older than 5 years old. And so keeping that in mind, we wanted to make sure we had team members who reflected that. And so I mentioned earlier that we were focusing specifically on helping to have residents understand how to separate things correctly and how to get engaged with some of the different changes that were happening in Oakland. We also worked with the Haulers Waste Management and California Waste Solutions, along with the East Bay Rental Housing Association, so getting buy-in also and working with the large property management company in Oakland, and also with Civic Corps. So you can kind of think of us when we were out on the ground, but we're kind of the boots on the ground and really the heart of this campaign and the face of the campaign out in the community. And so specifically for Cascadia's role, we were considered ourselves zero waste ambassadors, right? So we were the folks who were working primarily on 2 things. One, working directly with property managers to make sure that the infrastructure was set up correctly, right? So maybe property managers weren't sure, what is this new green cart? Is it going to fit here? Making sure that the collection system is set up right before we have even the residents start filling it up. So we made sure we provide that technical assistance to property managers. And then once it was, property managers got bought in and wanted us to actually go out there, we did the door-to-door outreach. And so the rest of my presentation will be focused primarily on what does door-to-door outreach actually look like. So here's some of us from the Zero Waste Ambassador team. It was really important to us that we had team members who either were from Oakland or very familiar with Oakland, and we're really excited to spread this great message to folks in their own community. We also have some great folks and volunteers from NCRA who also work closely with local unions to also work in their communities, like Fruitvale in Oakland. And so, we literally were going door to door, knocking on doors with the permission of the property manager and passing out outreach materials and reviewing, what was happening in Oakland and answering some of their questions and listening to what their concerns were.
So you're thinking, all right, Andrea, that sounds great. How does cultural competency fit into all of this? What can I do if I'm working in a community that maybe doesn't look like me, or maybe I don't speak the same language, or maybe I have team members who reflect that community? What can I do and what can I keep in mind to make sure that our program is successful? So some of the best practices we came across was that, one, noticing differences in communication styles and values. What I mean by that is that, every time you open a door, it's a new face, right? It's almost like charades of all right, what am I going to get and who am I going to be talking to? And so realizing that, for example, in some cultures, maybe direct eye contact is considered rude, but you may be thinking, oh, they're not looking at me, I don't know what's going on, but maybe for them, that's just not the way that they communicate. Or for some communities, talking very passionately in a loud tone and talking with their hand doesn't mean that they're mad, they're just really excited to talk to you, right? So keeping that in mind when you're talking to someone, especially face-to-face, is important. And remembering that nonverbal communication is just as important. If you're opening a door and you see someone that maybe is looking, sullen and your shoulders are, kind of shrugged, maybe they're having a bad day, and maybe composting isn't going to be the top of mind for them. So taking those kind of, body language cues of okay, I've got to take a step back, ask them how their day is first before I jump right in. So noticing that body language is also just as important as what you're actually saying. Another best practice is, if you can, including team members who are from that community can go a long way. Our other presenters just mentioned, it just helps with that connection, so that when you're talking to somebody and you're talking about, the neighborhood or street, it just creates that instant connection with that resident who may be talking to you the first time and may feel uncomfortable. But also, it's also important to identify culture-specific barriers, needs, and benefits. And what I mean by that is that, for some residents, there might be different problems that you may not know of. And so, for example, what happened for me when I was in the field, I went to a property, I went into the enclosure, and I saw a whole bunch of mixed trash all over the floor. But when I went to talk to the property manager, it sounded like the residents were on board, they got all the average materials, the bin sizes look fine, it should be working, right? But the more that I talked to and listened to the residents, I found out there were a lot of families in the building. I also found out that a lot of the residents in the building have kids, and it's their task or their chore to take out the trash. So by asking more questions, I found out, okay, so the kids are taking out the trash. I find out their parents, most of the parents in the building are working parents, maybe have maybe more than one job, so not home very often. And it's the grandparents or the older sibling that's taking out the trash or not taking out the trash for them. And so what I found when I dug a little bit more is that the children, they learn how to sort things, they're doing a great job, but once they get to the enclosure or to the trash chute, they couldn't reach the top of the bin. So what do? They tossed it. Right? So I was like, that's why everything is splattered all over this enclosure floor. It's not because they were tossing it because they didn't care. They were tossing it because it's a child that's taking out the trash and couldn't reach the top of the bin. So in this specific scenario, the barrier was they were having front-end big dumpster bins. I said maybe the carts might be a little bit more manageable. I was talking to the property manager and some of the residents. It's like, is there an opportunity for you to talk to residents to maybe see if we could have the parents more involved, or maybe this is not the safest place to reach. It's the trash chute is not very safe to reach. So those kinds of questions, finding out what's going on, not assuming that it's not that they want to participate in this situation, finding out what the barrier is and coming up with a resolution that works for that building or for those residents can really go a long way. Also, what's also important, or what was another best practice, was engaging with local community organizations and leadership. I know this Oakland Recycles is continuing, and Waste Management and the City of Oakland have a great partnership with local organizations where they are training them to also be volunteers and to go out to the community and train residents in their own community. We also talked earlier about not assuming that residents don't want to participate. Often they do. They just need the right messaging. talked a little bit about this earlier too, about being careful of literal translations and keeping in mind with some of the words that you're saying. We found some of our ambassadors, specifically, for example, Kevin was talking to some Chinese residents, and when he mentioned to them the word, "Oh, hey, we're starting composting in your building," they got really scared and were like immediately taken aback. And I asked him, like, what's going on? He said, they think we're actually composting in the building, meaning in the sense that there's going to be an actual container that's going to stir, actually collect the compost. It's going to sit here for weeks and get turned. They don't understand that it's actually food scrap recycling. And so for him, translating in a way that meant food scrap recycling, and that translating that it's going to get, and explaining further that compost doesn't mean it's actually going to stay in the building, it's the end result. But those kinds of words, well, even in our own industry, right, gets very confusing. So knowing that the words that you say can really make a difference of how someone interprets that. And that's why asking questions to make sure they understand is really important. Also, we talked about outreach tools that are accessible for non-English speaking residents. In Oakland, here's an example of some of the outreach materials. So they made sure that things were brightly colored and that they used a lot of images. They used text when they needed to, but having it available in different languages. We had a Chinese program guide, we had a Spanish program guide, we also had a Vietnamese program guide, because those are the main languages that we saw were most needed for brochure materials. And these were also really helpful so that if I went to a door and maybe I didn't speak the same language as that resident, at least I had a piece of material that I can give to them so they can take and review it later. Or asked to go back, and I would talk to the property manager and say, "Hey, if you speak the same language, can you go back and talk to that resident?" But having these materials in different languages that connected to the resident was really helpful. But we also reached residents in other ways. We had the new program up on the Oakland Recycle's website. We talked about media earlier, so we had things in the newspapers. We also had transit ads next to bus stops, the BART station. So Oakland really tried to make sure that, not only were they getting something in the mail about that this new program was coming, but coming from different angles and different avenues. And if you would like to see any of these examples, they're also on the Oakland Recycle's website, along with some of these translated materials that you can download for free. All right, so you're like, all right, Andrea, so this sounds really good. What else did you learn out when you were in the field? And so some of the lessons learned that we came across was that the reality is that sometimes going by yourself is great because it gives you that one-on-one connection with a resident, but there were also some areas in Oakland that, quite frankly, were not very safe for us to get to, and we wanted to keep that in mind. So for our team, we made it a rule that we never went to any building without at least 2 people there, not only for safety concerns, but also it just really helped so that when we were doing outreach, we can also hit that building more efficiently. Sometimes we were only given a certain window of time by the property manager to be in the building, but we tried to do it so that we were moving floor by floor. So, for example, if I was working on the floor and I was on one side of the floor, we would try to make sure that maybe, for example, Kevin was only a few doors away, so that, for example, if I talked to somebody and I knocked on the door and it was a resident who spoke a language I didn't speak, but I know it was a language that Kevin spoke, I was still within earshot and kind of eyesight away of saying, "Hey, Kevin, when you're done with your door, can you come over here and we'll talk to Mary here about her composting program." So having that extra backup really helped. And that, if we did come across any residents who maybe were a little upset, we had somebody else there to back us up as well. We're also carrying a lot of kitchen pails with us, and those things got heavy too, so having an extra pair of hands was really helpful. And then we also found that some of our biggest allies were the children. Some of the other presenters talked about that. And we found that it was really common that when we knocked on the door and we talked to a resident, maybe the parents were like, "I don't have time for this, I'm too busy." But the kids were at the door with them and said, "Hey, Mom and Dad, I'm learning about this in school. I'm really excited. Oh my God, I can't believe we finally have composting in our building. We're doing this in our cafeteria." And the parents said, "Oh, thank God, my kid knows what they're doing. They'll teach me." So, if you recognize and see that there are our children and our families in the household, asking them, hey, are your kids doing this at school? Bringing that home back to them was really helpful when we were doing door-to-door outreach. Some other lessons learned was that some overall themes that we found that residents were more receptive when the following things took place. If our team members spoke the same language as them, residents were provided with free tools and instructions. We also had, I don't have an example in front of me here, but a guide. A lot of questions that we got were like, composting is gross and icky, do I have to use a compostable bag? Do I have to put it directly in the pail? It was great that Oakland had a brochure in different languages of what kinds of things that could be used, whether it's a paper bag or newspaper or cardboard box. Those were also available in different languages. And also getting the free items of the tools of the recycling caddy and the kitchen pail really helped provide some incentives for folks to want to talk to us and get the free stuff. And us saying, hey, you can get the free stuff. Well, you got to talk to us first. Made sure that they stayed at the door. And another important thing was making sure that residents were notified ahead of time of our visit. So I talked earlier about that technical site assessment visit. We were there not only to make sure that the infrastructure and collection was set up in place was great, but it was also an opportunity for us to talk to the property manager and get an understanding of the culture of that building. We would ask questions like not only how many residents are here, but we would ask things like, is it mostly single occupants or is it mostly made up of families? Are there a lot of young folks here, or a whole bunch of techie folks who are having a lot of to-go containers? Those kinds of questions with the property manager really helps us inform so that when we schedule a follow-up for the door-to-door outreach that would happen later, we would make sure that we sent the right kind of team members who reflected the needs of that building to go out there. Another part of that we found really helpful was building that trust. When you open that door, and Hugo mentioned this earlier, of folks ask you a lot of questions of what do I do with my couch? What do I also do with this? I want to move this bin out of the way. Part of that building that trust is listening and being able to give that feedback to someone who can appropriately make some decisions on that. So we made sure that when we were doing our door-to-door outreach, we had a tablet. We were lucky that we had a tablet with us, or we were using our cell phones, or we had a piece of paper of keeping some notes down, so that if there was anything that came across in the conversation that needed attention or follow-up, we gave that reassurance to the resident that says, hey, I hear you, I'm taking this down, I'm going to give this information to the right person to address this. And that really went a long way with the resident wanting to talk to us. And also making sure you're willing to accept guidance from the community. Sometimes you'll talk to residents and say, this is not working for the building, I don't want this here. Finding out what's going on and then bringing that to the property manager to find out what we can do to fix it was really helpful. Some last things that I want to make sure I also talk on is that developing strategies where residents feel the most comfortable communicating with you. What I mean by that, along with some of these other tips here, is that we found that when we also talked to the property manager, and before we scheduled our site visit, we also asked the property manager, hey, what's the culture of this building? Are you communicating with your residents mostly through text? Sometimes property managers will text the residents like, hey, the bill is due, or hey, the laundry is broken, or our residents more likely to see a flyer next to the mailroom. And I bring that up because we talked about that notification ahead of time. So finding out, okay, residents in this building are more likely going to see a flyer that says, hey, we're coming at this specific time, and seeing we tried to put a picture of our faces, of our team, and with our vest on, so that when we came to the door, they're like, oh, yeah, Zero Waste Ambassadors. I saw that in the hallway. Or like, oh yeah, I got a text that you were going to come here. Having that permission ahead of time really went a long way so that residents were excited and willing to talk to us. And then other thing was determining if door-to-door outreach or group presentations worked best for the building. And what I mean by that, so here's an example of what our door-to-door actually looked at like. So we had ambassadors wearing brightly colored vests, which we found was really helpful because it gave us a little bit of a sense of authority and also made residents think that we looked important, but also it was really nice. Because luckily we also we were doing the outreach starting the summer of last year when the sun was still out, but as the year went on, it started to get darker. And so so we also made a rule for ourselves that we're not out any later than around 7 o'clock, not only for safety reasons, but you're also talking to folks who just got home, they're hungry, they got to prepare their dinner. Talking about recycling or composting is not going to be top of mind of them when they're trying to cook something. But if we did get permission, we try to work closely together, so we were within earshot or eyesight of each other. But sometimes door-to-door didn't work. The property manager says, you know what, I'd rather have you come talk to all of my residents at once. We have a community room downstairs, or we have monthly barbecues. So meeting them where they feel more comfortable communicating was really helpful. So here's an example of Kevin. He was doing a presentation across from Lake Merritt in a building that's mostly made up of seniors. We found that seniors also culturally too were some of our biggest champions. They had a lot of questions and they had a lot of time, and really had things like hazardous materials of like, what about my pills or medicine, or what about adult diapers? Like, these were real questions, and they have always wondered about this but didn't know who to talk to, and had an opportunity where, for example, Kevin was there with the building manager, so that also gave some authority and authorization of, hey, we're doing this together. We're all going to be in the same room, getting the same information and championing this together. But what we found helpful is that we would go over what was in each of the containers, and then afterwards, after the presentation, then we would pass out the free materials. And it's important to do that because it allows people not only to stick around for the presentation, but if you can see in the picture, we have some pieces of paper on the table. We would mark off what unit came to the training. And so we'd find out, okay, maybe 5D didn't show up. That means we have to go back to that door, or we have to tell the property manager, and the property manager has to go back. But having that list of knowing who did and didn't get the training was really helpful to give feedback also to the property manager. So I want to close it off by saying, I think we heard some really great examples, and I'm hoping that these are things that you'll also keep in mind when you're doing door-to-door outreach or any kind of outreach directly in the community. But when it comes to cultural competency, I think that it's really important to not just ask, or assume people's differences, but to really, sit back and think about where are they coming from. Let me listen to your needs and being available for them, and asking a lot of questions is really important. So. Thanks so much. If you would like to learn more about Oakland's programs, please visit their website, oaklandrecycles.com, and there's my contact information. Thank you.
Okay. Well, thanks to our three presenters. You guys did a great job, and I learned some new stuff, which is awesome. And so we have about 20, 25 minutes for questions, and I'll just open it up and call on you, and yeah.
For Megan, you talked a lot about finding the best messenger, depending on what cultural group you're talking to. And you mentioned that for at least the Chinese-speaking community, you conducted a survey. Is that generally, I can't really imagine any other way to do it. Is that the best way you would say?
So that was the way that we try to learn more.
Can you repeat the question here? Can you go to the mic and answer the question?
Does this come off? So the question was about the messaging and how you find the best messenger, and just kind of so Megan will talk a little bit about the messaging portion.
Okay, so I think the first part of your question was, how do you listen, right? What is the approach to different communities in finding out more of this information? And, it depends on the project, it depends on the community. So for the first project for the Chinese-speaking community, we used surveys, and these were in-person surveys. So we went to LA, and we went to San Francisco and walked around largely Chinese communities and just surveyed them. We also have done focus groups and found those effective, phone surveys, email surveys. There are a bunch of ways that you can find out these this type of information that you're seeking, and then from those surveys or those focus groups is where you find out who's the right messenger and who do they trust, and then picking that right messenger to deliver that message. Does that answer your question? Yeah. Okay.
I was just going to ask, along that same line of question, so you went to LA and then you went up to San Francisco. I guess my question is, are you going to find out different
finding out the information for your specific community, because the issues might be different depending on where you go. I mean, did you find that through when you listen to different communities, or was it kind of similar barriers to participation?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm seeing other people nod their head on this panel too. And I think, depending, again, there are always constraints, right? So depending on your constraints, you want to do the best job you can to be localized and to really listen to particular communities and craft a message that is that community. But, there are other circumstances where you have to create a more generalized message. And so I think the ideal, and I'm sure that Hugo and Andrea would agree, is to really tailor your outreach to a particular community, but unfortunately there are some instances where paint hair is a statewide campaign and you have to do a statewide message, right? So that's part of the constraint, but to the best of our abilities, localized. Yeah.
No, I do agree. You need to localize the message and specifically say on that area. Just to give you an example of a campaign that we are doing right now in Orange County. Orange County has a huge population of people from Central America and South America. But within that community, they have a big group of indigenous community. So we can have this message localized, but you still need to go even further to try to kind of figure out which part of this community speaks. They do speak Spanish, but it's so limited that you have to find other ways to kind of convey the same message. That's where you use a lot of illustrations, etc., just to make sure they know. That was great.
Actually, I had a quick question for you guys. Having been on the side of the projects as well, I find that one of the challenges that we have when we're kind of pitching the tailored messaging is that it sounds really insurmountable, right? Like, oh, I have to go to LA and San Francisco and this other place and this other place. And so maybe you guys can speak a little bit to how you fit multiple messages or a tailored message within a larger outreach campaign and what that actually kind of looks like on the ground when you're talking to city government or your clients or something like that. I mean, we often talk about it as trying to make it sound like a tailored message is the most effective, right? And ultimately, that's what we're really looking for, is to enact behavior change in an effective and efficient manner. And so I don't know if you guys have some expertise on that you could speak to.
Yeah, I would just say that I think it's worth the investment. If you're going to invest all these resources to maybe launch a new program, but you find out a few weeks later it's not working, well, maybe spending another extra week to do that extra research will go a long, long way. So I'd say, I know it's hard to do, but doing it right the first time is better than having to backtrack and spend more resources to, maybe it's translating material that's wrong, to have to pull those all out, or have to white out. I've seen that done before where they have to change things or reprint material because it was wrong. Not specifically in Oakland, but just in general other communities. So I think it's thinking about it. Is this worth the investment? If it is, I'm going to take the time to do it and do it right.
And just to add to that, also, if you have a campaign that is created nationally, like the ad campaign creates a lot of campaigns, but then when it comes to a local community, the language they're using, at least in Spanish, might not be suitable for that community. So instead of actually informing them, they can get more confused on that. So that's when you take the idea and then you make it cultural and applicable to that community. And as you're saying, you're going to spend a little bit more money when you already were given this ad, etc., for free, if you will. But it's worth the investment. Yeah.
I think a key component for us in being able to achieve this type of reach is working with partnerships, whether that be working with community champions, whether that be working with partnering organizations that have language skills that your organization doesn't have. Really utilizing that is how you're going to be able to do it and build upon the community that you've been part of.
Oh.
Hi. So there are two of us in our city, and if you have limited resources, we have very diverse community. We're trying to figure out how to speak to each of those communities in a way that makes sense with the resources and the time that the two of us have available. So if you had to pick a very focused way that when you have messages in communities, but a broad message to specific communities with limited resources, where would you say to focus our attention
have to concentrate. What is the biggest minority group that you have in there, for example? You know?
Armenian and Spanish.
Okay, so those are the big ones. You're actually ahead of the game. You already know where you want to focus in there. What I will recommend you to do is create some kind of partnership with community organizations that already do a lot of work in that community. They will love to have some of the materials that you might have, and if you don't have them, just talk to them and find out what they're doing with their communities, and that will be a really good way to start, depending on whatever resources you have.
Yeah, I'd also say along with those partnership communities, seeing if there's volunteers, if that's an option for your agency to recruit volunteers to help you spread that word. And if that was really helpful in Oakland, there's a lot of ground to reach, but there's a lot of residents who are super passionate and want to do something good in the community. And they're asking us, what can I do? And yes, we're going to train you, we're going to give you the right tools, and we're going to help be our ambassadors out there. That can go a long way.
Where do you get those high-quality images of garbage recycling compost?
Specifically, good question. I know I see some folks from Oakland in here. Does anyone know? I wasn't on the marketing development of it, but I believe, do you know, Gigantic Ideas?
Yeah, so we had a photo shoot, several photo shoots specifically for that. We put out a call for community members to volunteer to come and get their pictures taken, and actually the community members were very instrumental in spreading the pictures. And, it's my niece or it's my whoever. So they get another avenue to spreading the image.
Yeah, that's yeah. So they use for a whole number of tactics. Yeah. It's on the brochure, on the website, and social media posts. So we use this a lot. We put some effort into finding real residents, real messengers. We do it in the neighborhood. We do get a lot of mileage out of those testimonies and photos. So I would recommend it.
It's funny, we actually, Oakland, we came across one of the gentlemen up on the face of one of the brochure. We knocked on his door. We handed him the brochure. We're like, oh my God, this is you. You're really in Oakland. He's like, yeah, that's me. And so even I was impressed and super inspired that, he was building campaign in his building. He wanted to be part of the ad. He was from Oakland. It went a long way. So also the residents in his community said, hey, this is you, man. This is you on here. And they really want to support him in that apartment complex.
So along the lines of not being lost in translation, maybe specifically for Google, sometimes I work at Google actually doing outreach, and sometimes we find the need by circumstance to do it on the spot, kind of a translation where we will pull out the smartphone and just do a translation. So I'm wondering if you might be able to recommend anything that is more culturally relevant, kind of a translator. That isn't like
I don't have Facebook, remember? It would be great to have an app that will actually give it the translation. I use about 7 or different web pages just to clarify some of the stuff that I translate, and I work with 3 other interpreters and translators that I'm really good friends with. One is from Argentina, another one from El Salvador, another one from Chile. So we kind of just to find out which word we should use, etc. Is there a program that will kind of serve that purpose? I think that Google is the closest thing, but sometimes it's so difficult to follow some of the stuff in there. It's just, I wish I can tell you there's an app. Does anybody can come up with an app right now?
That'll be the workshop for next year.
Yeah. But if you want to call me right there, I can give you how much I would think to follow.
We have another question.
This is just a statement when it comes to using Google Translate, especially when you're doing translations. I find that the most effective way to use that is to make sure that whatever you're translating is very simple. You don't want it to complicate it.
Yeah, and besides, every time you do a campaign, it's going to be as simple as you want, and as you can as well, because the more beautiful words you use, Google is going to be completely confused, and your audience is going to be confused as well. So just be as simple as you can. Otherwise, there's a word that we use here. There's a flyer that I translated the other day. or they say flicker a cigarette butt on the street. There's like 7 different ways to say that in Spanish, and none of them is close to what they meant on that flyer. So I suggested just get rid of that word and just like, do not throw cigarette butts on the freeway. Although it sounds really cool when you say flicker, like, okay, that's good, but it doesn't make sense in other areas. That's one thing. That's it. Well, thank you very much.